The Pope didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the podium. He just said one sentence. And the entire Catholic world went into free fall. Within minutes, Vatican offices slammed their doors shut. Phones lit up like emergency beacons. Newsrooms across Europe sprinted to rewrite their headlines. Social media erupted with a single question. Did Pope Leo XIV really say that? And yet, outside the Vatican walls, Rome was having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The sky was clear. Street vendors were arguing about prices. Tourists were taking blurred photos of statues they couldn't identify. No one, not a single person strolling those cobblestones, knew they were walking past the quiet epicenter of a coming cultural earthquake. Inside, a routine meeting was supposed to unfold. The kind of bureaucratic morning where bishops sip bitter coffee, flip through predictable agenda notes, and politely debate procedural revisions that won't matter by next week. But Pope Leo XIV had grown tired of being polite. For years, he had watched a slow drift, sermon sanded down to avoid offense, doctrine softened to match trends, truth replaced by whatever felt comfortable. He had kept his observations private. He had tried patience. He had waited for his clergy to realize the ground was shifting beneath them. This morning, that patience ended. He stepped to the podium. He let the silence hang long enough for the room to realize something was different. And then he opened with the sentence that detonated everything. The Church is not here to mirror society. The Church is here to confront it. Gasps. Whispers. Phones rising like periscopes. The atmosphere snapped. Because everyone in that room knew. This wasn't going to be a diplomatic address. This was going to be a reckoning. And what he said next. About truth, about culture, about the soul of the Church, would ignite a firestorm that would race far beyond the walls of Rome. Now, to understand why his message hit with the force of a global shockwave, we have to go back to the moment it all began. Quick moment, subscribe now. It helps the channel grow and guarantees you never miss the next release. The sentence was barely 12 words long. Not shouted. Not heated. Not embellished with dramatic gestures. Just spoken, calmly, evenly, almost too quietly. The Church is not here to mirror society. The Church is here to confront it. For one moment, the room held its breath. Then everything changed. The bishops in the first row jolted as if the Pope had just slammed a hammer down onto the lectern. A young priest in the back choked on his own coffee. A Monsignor dropped his pen, the metallic clatter echoing off the marble. And instantly, instinctively, dozens of phones rose in the air like a forest of black glass mirrors, recording history before anyone could fully process it. The hall inside the Apostolic Palace was supposed to be a place of order, calm, and Vatican predictability. A place where meetings drifted along with the steady, gentle monotony of church bureaucracy. But not today. Today, the atmosphere snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The Pope had spoken, and nothing would go back to normal. Outside the walls, Rome carried on without a clue. Inside this hall, the world was already changing. Hours earlier, before the combustion began, the morning felt painfully ordinary. The sun had risen in that soft Roman way, sheets of gold sliding down basilica domes, warming stone streets, announcing another postcard perfect day. Street vendors arranged postcards in neat rows. Tourists squinted at maps. A group of nuns hurried across the piazza with bags of groceries, laughing in a way that suggested nothing catastrophic was on the horizon. Inside the Vatican walls, the meeting attendees shuffled in with identical expectations: another standard agenda, another slow procession of reports, another morning where nothing surprising would happen. They greeted one another politely, exchanged thin smiles, discussed train delays and weather forecasts with the ritualistic boredom that only long-serving church officials could perfect. A few made jokes about the stale pastries. One bishop made a point to refill his coffee twice before things began, the caffeine equivalent of spiritual armor. Routine. Predictable. Safe. But Pope Leo XIV was not a man shaped for routine. And he had no intention of offering them safety. When Pope Leo entered the room, the shift was subtle, nearly invisible. He was not dramatic. He was not emotional. He walked with the same quiet dignity he always carried. But those close to him recognized something different in his expression, a tightness around his eyes, a stillness in his posture. A kind of internal gravity. He took his place behind the podium. And then he didn't speak. 5 seconds of silence. 10. 15. At first, the room waited with patient reverence. Then, slowly, unease bubbled beneath the surface. Some wondered if he was searching for the right starting point. Others suspected he was waiting for latecomers. But a few, very few, understood what was happening. Pope Leo XIV was letting the silence do the opening for him. Silence, after all, reveals discomfort. Silence forces honesty. Silence makes people pay attention. And Pope Leo had spent years being ignored, debated, softened, interpreted beyond recognition. He wasn't going to allow misunderstanding today. Behind that silence simmered years of frustration. He had watched church leaders dilute teachings in the name of diplomacy. He had seen pastors deliver homilies that resembled motivational speeches more than spiritual declarations. He had listened as Catholic educators replaced doctrine with dialogue frameworks and identity affirmations that said everything except the truth. He had seen faith turned into a product, packaged, marketed, trimmed to avoid offense. Every year, the Church seemed to bend a little more to whatever cultural pressure was fashionable that month. Every year, fewer people seemed to notice. But he noticed. He watched. He waited. And on this Tuesday morning, in this supposedly routine meeting, he decided to stop waiting. When the Pope finally opened his mouth, the first sentence detonated. But the second, and the third, began the true earthquake. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining strength. For too long, we have allowed the truth to be reshaped by the culture around us. A ripple moved through the hall, discomfort, agreement, confusion, fear. He continued, each line sharpened like a blade. We soften the gospel to avoid offense. We bend doctrine to fit the expectations of the moment. We bury clarity beneath layers of gentle language because we are afraid of being disliked. Those closest to the podium felt each sentence hit like a hammer. Then came the line. The one that would explode across continents, the one that would ignite a global firestorm, the one that would define his papacy. There are not many truths. There is one truth, and it has a name: Jesus Christ. The room broke. Literally broke. One bishop gasped loudly enough for heads to turn. Two officials stood up and walked out, their faces pale and tight. A cluster of young priests actually began to applaud before stopping themselves, unsure if clapping was allowed. Journalists scrambled with frantic energy, typing, recording, whispering, elbowing one another to capture the moment. Even the Vatican aides, those famously stoic figures trained to remain neutral, looked shaken. The generational split was immediate and unmistakable. On the left side of the hall, a group of priests in their 20s and 30s leaned forward as if witnessing the sunrise after a long night. Their eyes glimmered with something close to relief, perhaps even hope. This was the Pope they had prayed for. A leader willing to say what many of them whispered privately. A leader not afraid of modern criticism. A leader who remembered that truth isn't supposed to make everyone comfortable. On the opposite side, older bishops stiffened. Some exchanged tense glances. Others scribbled urgent notes, no doubt preparing statements of necessary clarification for damage control. These were men who had built entire careers on diplomacy, bridge building, and subtle adaptations to cultural currents. To them, Leo's bluntness was not courageous, it was destabilizing. And sitting above this generational chasm, Pope Leo continued without flinching. As the murmurs and whispers swelled, Leo spoke again, this time with a sharper, almost surgical precision. "If the cross offends you," he said, "then perhaps you have misunderstood its power." That line landed like a thunder strike. Some gasped. Some nodded. Some looked genuinely frightened. Even journalists, trained to remain objective, exchanged wide-eyed glances at the sheer audacity of it. Pope Leo XIV was not simply critiquing culture. He was critiquing the Church's own willingness to capitulate to it. The tension in the room thickened until it felt almost physical, air heavy, lungs tight, the atmosphere vibrating with something too big to contain. The moment the Pope stepped away from the microphone, the hall erupted. Conversations piled on top of each other, whispers, debates, arguments. A cardinal snapped at an aide. A young priest tried to calm an older bishop who seemed moments away from storming out a second time. Inside the building, Vatican personnel actually sprinted, down corridors. Phones buzzed with alerts. Officials were summoned urgently. Doors slammed. Aides whispered into earpieces. One journalist sent a frantic voice message to her editor. "Publish the clip immediately. This is the biggest Vatican story in a decade." By the time Pope Leo XIV exited the hall, the speech had already escaped into the world. Clips were posted to social media in real time, captions ranging from furious to ecstatic. Trending phrases began populating screens. #One Truth. #Pope Leo speech. #Vatican shock. #Truth's culture. The firestorm had begun. While chaos surged inside the Vatican, Rome itself remained strangely tranquil. A taxi driver played a radio station entirely unaware he was living through a moment that historians would one day annotate in textbooks. A couple posed for a photo on the bridge near Castel Sant'Angelo, smiling as if the world were simple. Life continued with its usual Roman hum, clattering plates, scooter horns, distant church bells. But slowly, gradually, something shifted. Screens in cafe windows began showing clips of the speech. Tourists glanced up, confused. Local journalists started gathering near Vatican gates. Priests walking the streets paused to read breaking news headlines. Rome could not stay ignorant for long. Not with a message this explosive. As pandemonium unfolded around him, Pope Leo XIV walked the quiet corridor back to his private study with the calm of a man who had finally done what needed to be done. He wasn't proud. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't energized by the chaos. He simply looked relieved. As if a weight he had carried for years had finally been spoken into the open. He knew what was coming. The debates, the condemnation, the emergency meetings, the torrent of editorial panels that would dissect every syllable he had uttered. He also knew that half the church would call him reckless, and the other half would call him courageous. But Leo didn't care about sides. He cared about the truth. And today, truth had been spoken without compromise for the first time in a very long time. By late morning, broadcast anchors on 3 continents repeated his lines. Commentators argued over the implications. Some declared him a prophet. Others called him a threat to modern harmony. Still others insisted he was dragging the church backward. But no one ignored him. And that was the point. By noon, Rome felt less like a city and more like the command center of a global ideological confrontation. A bishop in Argentina called his office in panic. A Catholic university in the United States held a spontaneous emergency forum. A French columnist declared that the Pope has finally set himself against modern culture. The speech didn't simply spread. It detonated. The firestorm was already too big to contain. Back inside the Vatican, where marble walls and ancient frescoes had witnessed centuries of conflict, the air felt electric. Some corridors buzzed with activity. Others pulsed with anger. Others hummed with whispered hope. The entire institution teetered between panic and awakening. And as the sun climbed higher over Rome, one realization echoed in every corner of the church. Pope Leo XIV hadn't delivered a speech. He had launched a confrontation. A direct challenge to the foundations of modern culture. Whether this confrontation would purify the church or tear it apart, no one yet knew. But one truth became clear before Chapter 1 ended. This morning marked the beginning of a war. One fought not with armies, but with truth. Not with weapons, but with conviction. And the world had no idea how much it was about to change. The Vatican had endured centuries of crises, schisms, wars, scandals, reforms, but seldom had a single sentence sent its leadership into such frenzy. Moments after Pope Leo XIV left the hall, a group of senior cardinals converged in one of the side conference rooms, their voices rising before the door even closed behind them. The long mahogany table, usually a symbol of calm deliberation, now felt like a battleground. Cardinal Santori slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "He cannot speak like this," he declared. "Not in this climate. Not with the entire world listening." Across from him, Cardinal Munoz leaned back, fingers interlocked, face unreadable. "Or perhaps," he said quietly, "this is the moment we needed. A reminder of who we are." That comment triggered a fresh surge of debate. His dismantling decades of diplomatic progress. No, he's restoring moral clarity. Governments will retaliate. Believers will return. We cannot afford instability. We cannot afford silence. Every sentence collided with another, sparks flying in a clash of ideologies older than any of the men in the room. Power dynamics shifted with every argument. Alliances wobbled. Clerics who had been united on administrative matters suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a philosophical divide. And beneath all of it pulsed an unmistakable current of fear. Not fear of the Pope. Not fear of public backlash. But fear of losing control, political control, cultural influence, internal authority. Leo's message had not just challenged the world, it had destabilized the very foundations upon which many careers and reputations rested. Cardinal Rinaldi, one of the most influential figures in the Curia, finally rose from his chair. "We must respond immediately," he insisted. A clarification. A softening. Something to neutralize the most inflammatory interpretations. But what if he meant every word? Munoz countered calmly. Silence fell for the first time since the meeting began. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. He did. And that terrified them. Outside the Vatican walls, the firestorm did not simmer, it erupted. Across the world, the Pope's words ricocheted through parishes, homes, and newsrooms, scattering reactions like shrapnel. In Brazil, a parish in São Paulo erupted into a heated debate after Mass. One group applauded the Pope's courage, insisting the Church had been too soft for too long. Another group accused him of pushing people away with unnecessary rigidity. In Nigeria, a young priest replayed the clip on a projector screen, his congregation leaning forward, some nodding with fierce conviction, others crossing their arms with skepticism. In France, news anchors replayed the most controversial line on loop. There are not many truths. There is one truth. Painlists tore each other apart on live television. Dangerous rhetoric, one insisted. A necessary confrontation, argued another. An attack on modern identity, declared a third. Families around dinner tables argued just as fervently. Some parents clung to the Pope's clarity like a life raft in a cultural storm. Others felt betrayal, worried this would push their adult children further away from faith. Politicians, sensing an opportunity or a threat depending on their ideology, issued statements within hours. One European minister declared the speech divisive and socially irresponsible. A South American president praised Leo for defending the moral fabric of civilization. Think tanks released essays. Editorial boards scrambled. Talk shows extended their broadcasts. And universities, those intellectual battlegrounds where ideas are sharpened and destroyed, reacted faster than anyone. Panels formed overnight. Truth versus relativism. The ethics of moral absolutism. The future of faith in a post-truth world. Professors argued with students. Students argued with each other. Some universities condemned Leo in official statements. Others invited priests to give guest lectures. Modern culture felt attacked, and its response was nothing short of explosive. While older bishops panicked and strategized, younger clergy reacted with a very different energy. Within hours of the speech, WhatsApp groups lit up. Telegram channels overflowed. Email chains multiplied like wildfire. Screens flashed with messages. Did you hear him? This is the leadership we needed. Finally someone said it, no more apologetic Catholicism. Brothers, today may be the turning point of our generation. Some young priests, emboldened by the Pope's words, began organizing informal digital communities. One group grew so quickly that in a matter of hours it had adopted a name: the Truth Keepers. Their mission was simple, if idealistic: to restore courage to Catholic preaching, to proclaim doctrine without fear, to stand with the Pope regardless of backlash. Meanwhile, older bishops watched these movements with growing alarm. This could become an uprising, whispered one. They will challenge our authority, murmured another. They will force confrontation inside the church, warned a third. The divide that had cracked open in the assembly hall was now spreading like fissures beneath the entire institution. What had been simmering beneath the surface for years, generational tension, frustration with compromise, hunger for authenticity, was now breaking into the open. And no one knew how far it would go. Digital platforms, of course, were the wildest battlefield of all. Twitter, or whatever platform variation existed, exploded with hashtags. #Pope Leo XIV. #Truth Crisis. #Culture War Pope. #One Truth. #Relativism is dead. #Cancel the Pope. #Stand with Leo. Influencers with millions of followers posted instant reactions. Some mocked him mercilessly. This Pope woke up today and chose violence, spiritual violence. Others accused him of threatening global harmony or declaring war on human freedom. Still others praised him with reverence. He spoke what many are afraid to say. This is real leadership. Video clips of the speech were edited, remixed, slowed down, zoomed in, paired with dramatic music, turned into memes, turned into propaganda, turned into symbols. Some users sent threats. Others sent prayers. Still others sent nothing but fire emojis and applause. A digital war zone had opened, one where truth was debated at the speed of light, and the Pope's face, once a symbol of calm authority, had become the world's most controversial icon overnight. While the world combusted, Pope Leo XIV was deep in private meetings, calm, unshaken. Each bishop entered his study with a different mix of emotions: fear, confusion, anger, guilt. But Leo always began the same way. He looked them in the eye, patient and unwavering, and asked, "Have you been faithful to the truth, or have you chosen comfort?" Some broke instantly. One bishop, a man known publicly for serenity and composure, dissolved into tears within minutes. "I've been a coward," he whispered. "I wanted to be liked. I wanted peace. I feared judgment." Leo didn't scold him. He simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Courage begins with honesty." Another bishop reacted very differently. Red-faced, defensive, he snapped, "Your words have caused chaos across continents. This is irresponsible leadership." Leo did not flinch. "Truth is not irresponsible," he replied. "Only fear is." The bishop stormed out, slamming the door, leaving the papal guard startled. A third bishop, a quiet man, rarely noticed, listened to the Pope's question and nodded slowly. "I have compromised," he said. "Not in doctrine, but in conviction." I have preached carefully instead of boldly. Then preach boldly now, Leo said. God will do the rest. Some bishops left strengthened. Others left devastated. A few left furious. But every one of them left changed. And with each private meeting, the fracture inside the church widened. By the second day after the speech, it was no longer just a religious controversy. It was a global identity crisis. Talk shows devolved into shouting matches over questions that had been avoided for years. Is truth objective or subjective? Does society define morality or discover it? Has religion compromised itself to survive? Is conviction bigotry or courage? Should spiritual authority ever challenge culture? Universities were the loudest battlegrounds. One campus hosted a debate titled "The Death of Absolute Truth" that attracted hundreds, nearly causing a riot. Another professor published a viral paper arguing the Pope had undermined the philosophical foundation of modern identity. In response, a group of students gathered on the quad with handwritten signs. Truth exists. We stand with Leo. Meanwhile, mainstream media elevated every possible angle. Psychologists weighed in on moral discomfort. Sociologists spoke of cultural fragmentation. Political strategists warned of ideological instability. Theologians battled over interpretation and intent. The Pope's words were no longer just a speech. They had become a mirror held up to society's deepest contradictions. People were not just debating Catholicism. They were debating themselves. Their identities, beliefs, fears, values. The question beneath every argument was the same. Do we actually want the truth? Or do we just want comfort disguised as truth? The world had not been prepared to confront that question. But now it had no choice. On the fourth day, the crisis escalated. A confidential document leaked to the press. A draft letter written by a group of senior clerics. Its contents were explosive. The letter accused Pope Leo XIV of endangering global unity, reigniting ideological conflict, abandoning diplomatic responsibility, threatening the pastoral mission of the Church, and most pointedly, dividing the Church through aggressive absolutism. Within minutes, news outlets published the draft. Commentators dissected every sentence. Opponents of the Pope hailed it as evidence of internal rebellion. Supporters denounced it as cowardice. Social media detonated again. One trending post read, "The clerics who bent their knees to culture are now terrified of a Pope who won't." Another read, "If the Church is dividing, it is dividing between those who believe the gospel and those who believe public opinion." The Vatican scrambled to contain the fallout. But it was too late. The Church was on the brink of open conflict, a spiritual civil war carried out not through armies, but through ideology, authority, and conviction. And through it all, Pope Leo XIV stood firm, unshaken, refusing to retreat from the truth he had proclaimed. As night fell over Rome, casting long shadows across St. Peter's Square, a single thunderous question echoed across the Church and the world. Can the Pope survive the culture he just confronted? By the end of the week, Rome no longer felt like a city. It felt like a battlefield. Outside the Vatican walls, thousands of people flooded St. Peter's Square, supporters waving banners that read "Stand with Truth" and "Courage is Contagious," protesters shouting slogans accusing the Pope of moral authoritarianism, police forming tight corridors to keep the factions apart. Chants rolled across the square like waves. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" from one side, while the other roared back, "Truth is not a weapon." Journalists perched on portable platforms, broadcasting live in front of the swirling chaos. News vans crowded the streets. Aerial drones buzzed overhead, capturing footage of a church more visibly divided than it had been in generations. The air vibrated with both hope and fury. Pilgrims knelt in prayer. Activists waved megaphones. Priests tried to mediate arguments between strangers. Tourists watched in stunned disbelief. No one had expected a single papal address to turn Rome into the ideological epicenter of the world. But Leo's message had done exactly that. And every corner of the globe was watching. While crowds clashed outside, Pope Leo XIV called his closest advisors, those who still stood with him, into a private chamber deep within the apostolic palace. The room was small and dimly lit, a sacred contrast to the chaos just beyond the walls. Leo stood at the head of the table, hands gently resting on its polished surface. His face carried the weight of the past days, but his voice held steady conviction. "I did not speak to create turmoil," he began quietly. "I spoke because silence would have destroyed us." The room fell into reverent stillness. "For years," he continued, "we have watched the Church bend, reshape, soften itself to match the world's expectations. We told ourselves it was mercy. We told ourselves it was pastoral care. But mercy without truth is not mercy at all." Several clerics lowered their heads. Leo's gaze swept across them, not accusatory, but sorrowful, resolute. "I did not speak to wound the world," he said. "I spoke to save the soul of the Church before it collapses under the weight of cultural compromise." Then he delivered the line that anchored the whole moment, a line that would echo far beyond that room. "Truth does not bend for acceptance." Silence followed, not the tense kind from days before, but a silence thick with conviction. A silence of men realizing their Pope had not merely reacted to the culture. He had confronted the fault lines they had all felt but ignored. When the meeting ended, some left with renewed courage. Some left with trembling uncertainty. But all left knowing that nothing in the Church would ever be the same again. 2 days later, just when it appeared the rebellion against Pope Leo might gain momentum, something unexpected happened. A coalition of cardinals, previously known for their neutrality, careful diplomacy, and well-maintained silence, stepped forward. Cardinal Duval, a respected French theologian known for decades of measured caution, issued a public statement. "The Holy Father has spoken truth with courage. And perhaps it is we who must find the courage to receive it." His words reverberated across Europe. Then came Cardinal Okoye of Nigeria. "The Pope has called the Church back to its mission. We must stand with him." Then Cardinal Pereira of Brazil. "The truth has grown dim. Leo has rekindled its flame." Within hours, their statements became global headlines. And something shifted. The rebellion, previously growing, fueled by panic and pride, began to lose ground. The cardinals who had been confidently drafting their counter-documents now found themselves facing a wave of unexpected support for the Pope. Inside Vatican offices, whispers changed tone. Duval supports him. Okoye too. This changes everything. We might be witnessing a realignment. And indeed, they were. For the first time since the firestorm began, momentum swung back toward Leo. Not because of pressure. Not because of fear. But because leaders who had once remained neutral finally found their voices. And they echoed the Pope's. The shift inside the church rippled outwards. Governments quickly realized they needed to respond. Some released statements condemning the Pope's regressive ideology. Others praised him for defending moral clarity in a confused era. A few remained strategically silent, unsure which way the wind would blow. Activist groups organized new protests. Coalitions threatened boycotts. Human rights organizations accused the Pope of reviving old-world dogma. Meanwhile, academics scrambled to produce overnight essays, analyses, and rebuttals. Titles filled digital spaces. The End of Relativism. Leo XIV and the New Absolutism. Cultural identity under threat. The truth question reopened. Interfaith leaders joined in. An imam in Cairo applauded Leo's courage to speak of absolute truth. A rabbi in New York criticized what he called rigid spiritual posturing. A Buddhist scholar in Japan simply said, "Truth is not harmed by challenge." But underneath the uproar, a new tone began to surface. A surprising one. People, critics and supporters alike, began admitting something. Modern relativism was showing cracks. The Pope's speech had exposed them. His moral clarity, whether embraced or rejected, had forced the world to examine contradictions it had successfully ignored for decades. Suddenly, the conversation shifted from outrage to introspection. Not everywhere. Not loudly. But undeniably. Leo had touched a nerve, one the world didn't realize was waiting to be touched. While political and academic battles raged, something more human and more powerful began happening quietly across the world. Stories. Real stories. A young woman in Canada posted a video late at night. She described years of feeling lost in a world where everything was fluid, nothing mattered, and truth was whatever you felt that day. After hearing Leo's statement, she said, "For the first time, something felt solid. I feel like I have a place to stand again." The video went viral. A priest in Ireland wrote an essay confessing that he had softened sermons out of fear, fear of backlash, fear of being labeled judgmental, fear of losing parishioners. "Yesterday, I preached the gospel without apology," he wrote. "And for the first time in years, my church was silent, not offended, but listening." A family in Argentina filmed themselves sitting together at their dining table. They spoke about how Leo's message had forced them to confront long-avoided wounds, misunderstandings, and secrets. Through tears, they said, "We finally talked honestly. And it brought healing." These stories gathered digital momentum. They didn't overshadow the protests. They didn't silence the critics. But they created something new. A sense that Leo's words had awakened something deep and long neglected. A hunger for clarity, conviction, and meaning. The firestorm, instead of destroying people, was beginning to illuminate them. As days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. The chaos began to cool. Not because the conflict resolved, but because the world began absorbing the impact of Leo's message. A movement, slow, steady, uncoordinated but unmistakable, started to shape the cultural landscape. Priests rewrote homilies, returning to themes long buried under caution. Political commentators spoke more openly about the need for moral foundations. Educational institutions added new courses on truth, ethics, and identity. Theological faculties held packed seminars analyzing the Pope's speech. Media debates shifted from shock to genuine inquiry. It wasn't harmonious. It wasn't unity. But it was a transformation. People were thinking again. Questioning assumptions. Re-evaluating convictions. And in that re-evaluation, something ancient and powerful began stirring. A collective realization that conviction, real conviction, had value. The Church, though still divided, was awakening. The world, though still loud, was listening. The firestorm was no longer just destruction. It had become purified. 3 weeks after the initial explosion, Pope Leo XIV prepared to speak publicly once more. Crowds flooded St. Peter's Square. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Some expected him to soften his tone. Others braced for an even stronger message. But when Leo stepped to the balcony, he looked neither hardened nor apologetic. He looked resolute. His voice carried across the square, not booming, not forceful, but clear. "I did not speak to divide the world," he said. "I spoke because division already existed, hidden beneath politeness and fear." Then the line came. The same line that had fractured the world and ignited a revolution. "There is one truth, and it has a name, Jesus Christ." A hush fell. Not fury. Not outrage. Silence. A silence not of shock, but of recognition. As if the world, after weeks of chaos, was finally hearing the line for what it was, not what they feared it meant. Leo continued. The firestorm that followed did not come from the truth. It came from the illusions truth revealed. Some cried. Some knelt. Some simply stood still, absorbing the weight of the words. For the first time since the ordeal began, the atmosphere felt less like a battlefield, and more like a moment of clarity. The world had been shaken, but it was also awakening. The next morning, before dawn, Pope Leo XIV walked quietly onto the terrace overlooking St. Peter's Square. The city was still. The chaos of the past week seemed distant and unreal. As he stood alone, the first rays of sunlight broke over the rooftops of Rome, washing the Vatican stones in gold. It was a new day, for him, for the Church, for the world. His message had divided millions. It had challenged them, shaken them, angered them, awakened them. But beneath all the turmoil, one truth had survived. Clear, immovable, unchanged. Leo hadn't simply confronted modern culture. He had forced the world to choose. Comfort or conviction. Relativism or truth. Silence or courage. And whatever the world chose next, one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same. If this story caught your attention, subscribe, comment, like and join us for the next chapter.